The chamber was impossibly vast. A dome of glass and living crystal hung above the Galactic Council, revealing a slow-turning nebula outside. Ships the size of cities drifted in the distance, their shadows casting streaks of violet light across the floor. Every seat in the chamber was filled with a representative from a different species. Some shimmered, some floated, a few pulsed softly with color instead of words. It was the greatest assembly in the galaxy. Leaders of empires, architects of peace. And for the first time in its history, Earth had a seat. The human delegation arrived late, their ship a dented diplomatic cruiser that barely passed inspection. It creaked when it docked. No one turned to look. Not at first. Julian Ross stepped out alone. He was tall by human standards, average by galactic ones. His suit was crisply pressed, dark blue with a small Earth emblem over the chest. No armor, no elaborate cybernetic enhancements. Just a young man with tired eyes, a datapad, and something else in his stride. Something the others didn't yet know to recognize. He walked to the smallest chair at the edge of the chamber. It hadn't been used in over 100 cycles. Someone had to brush off the dust. Murmurs began. The primitive race. Didn't they only just reach FTL? They still use combustion-based weapons. Julian took his seat without a word. His translator clicked once, sensing to the council's system. Alien eyes, many eyes, turned to study him. Some curious, some amused. The Dream delegate, a gelatinous being shaped like a slow-moving wave, leaned toward its neighbor. They still dream in analog, it whispered, rippling with amusement. The neighbor, a tall avian hybrid from the Villar Dominion, chuckled. They still wear cloth. Julian heard everything. The translator was clean, unfiltered. Earth insisted on that. He didn't flinch, didn't react. He simply opened his datapad and began reviewing the council's agenda. The room settled. The next speaker began, a crystalline philosopher from the Thren Collective, delivering a 10-minute monologue on gravitational ethics. Julian tried to follow, but the syntax looped in ways that made his temples throb. He noted that for later. Another hour passed, then another. When the recess was called, Julian remained seated while most of the others floated away into social orbs. No one approached him. No one welcomed him. He expected that. They saw Earth as small, loud, unrefined. They had no idea what humanity had been through to get to this room. They had no concept of what humans carried in their history, in their hearts, and in their instincts. They thought Earth was late to the game. Julian Ross looked up at the stars beyond the dome. He smiled, just barely. They laughed now. Let them. The council hall buzzed with quiet conversations as the break continued. Julian sat still, eyes scanning the digital roster of delegates. His datapad pinged with incoming messages. Most of them were irrelevant, routine status updates from Earth's government. But one caught his attention. A short message from his superior. Stay composed. Don't let them push you. He shut off the screen. No more distractions. A bell rang, signaling the end of the recess. The room's focus shifted immediately, and the delegates returned to their seats, each gliding or floating with an air of grace. As Julian took his place at the edge of the chamber, a sudden, familiar noise broke through the chatter. It was the sharp, clicking voice of Korka, an elder from the Triumph Collective, a race known for their excessive caution and delicate diplomacy. Korka's body was a floating mass of translucent membranes, filled with gases that allowed her to shift from one shape to another. Her voice, though, was deliberate and firm. Humanity, she began, turning her glowing eyes to Julian. We have observed you. Your species is fascinating, but your ways are foreign, primitive. It is difficult to understand your rise in the galactic sphere. There it was, the tone he'd been waiting for. Korka's species had a reputation for subtlety, for slow-moving words that buried sharp edges beneath layers of politeness. But Julian could feel the edge now. I understand, Julian said, standing. Our history is not what most of you are accustomed to. We fought wars, made mistakes, and yes, our technology has lagged behind. But we are here. You don't have to respect us, but you will soon learn not to underestimate us." A few murmurs rippled through the room. Korka's bioluminescent skin flickered slightly, a sign of irritation. "Underestimate? Is that your purpose here? To speak of violence?" Julian's eyes locked onto the elder. "Violence is a tool, yes, but you misunderstand. Our wars have never been for conquest. We fought, we survived, we adapted. That's why we're here." He paused. "That's why you're all here." The room grew colder. Julian's words were not met with applause or agreement, but with uncertainty. He could see it in their faces. Some thought him brash, others foolish. The Villar delegate leaned forward, a sharp beak clicking in amusement. "We," the Villar representative said, voice carrying a note of superiority, "use efficiency and deterrence. We do not fight wars. We prevent them before they start." "And when deterrence fails?" Julian asked, his tone steady but forceful. The silence stretched for a long moment. Even the Villar leader seemed caught off guard by the question. "We should consider," Julian continued, "what happens when deterrence is not enough. What happens when a species like the Tyrants, or worse, faces an enemy that does not care for your efficiency? That is when survival becomes the only language that matters." Korka's membranes shifted, clearly disturbed by Julian's implication. A few other delegates muttered among themselves. The air in the chamber felt thick, heavy with unspoken questions. The chairperson of the council, a massive being made of shifting basalt-like plates, raised one long arm to silence the room. "Humanity has a point," the chairperson said, their voice deep and rumbling like an earthquake. "Perhaps we should allow them to speak more of this. Survival." Julian nodded, offering a small smile. "Thank you." He could feel the eyes of the council on him now, doubtful, curious, wary. They had no idea what humanity was capable of, not yet. But they were starting to understand that Julian wasn't just here to be polite. He was here to make them see that Earth's history, messy and chaotic as it was, held a strength none of them had anticipated. And somewhere, in the back of his mind, Julian knew they were already beginning to fear it. The council was about to resume its proceedings when the room was suddenly pierced by a shrill, dissonant sound, a scream that cut through the air like a blade. It came from the central communications hub, a large sphere suspended above the assembly, pulsing with light. The delegates froze, some instinctively pulling away from the sound, others visibly disturbed. The image in the hub flickered once, twice, before stabilizing. A video feed appeared on every display, showing a peaceful planet surrounded by a cluster of calm blue moons. The Tyran homeworld, a serene and lush place, now burning. Massive ships, far larger than anything the Tyrants could build, hovered above, their weapons turning the skies into fire. Cities, once gleaming with life, were reduced to dust. The screams from the Tyran survivors cut through the static. "Help, someone. Please, help." The voice was broken, frantic, laced with terror. For the first time since Julian had arrived, the council was silent. Korka's gelatinous form rippled violently. "This is an emergency. We must act. The enemy fleet is too strong." A new voice interrupted, this one from the Ikari, a species of energy beings who could communicate by projecting their thoughts. "There are no known defenses on Tyran. Their military is non-existent." Julian felt the room shift. The usual cool detachment of the council members was replaced with something raw. Fear. There was no calculated discussion of diplomacy or containment. No protocols to follow. Just panic. He stood, his chair scraping across the polished floor as he moved toward the center of the room. The Tyrants had no military, no way to fight back. They were peaceful, yes, but that was the exact reason why they were being obliterated. The human ambassador didn't need to glance at the council for their reactions. He knew what they were thinking. They were thinking about their own interests. They were considering how to minimize risk. He couldn't wait any longer. "Send a fleet," Julian said, his voice cutting through the rising din. "Send ours." The room fell quiet. Every delegate turned to him. Some looked at him like he'd just spoken an ancient curse. Others, like the Valar, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Humanity has no fleet strong enough for this," Korka responded, her tone icy. "Your technology is far behind ours. Your ships, too small. Your firepower, insufficient. We've already seen the scale of the threat." "We don't need the biggest fleet," Julian countered, locking eyes with the Jareen delegate, whose body pulsed with vibrant shades. "We need the most determined one." There was a brief, awkward pause as the council deliberated silently, their internal communications clearly running at full speed. Julian's heart pounded. This was it, his moment. The moment he would either prove humanity's worth or cement their reputation as nothing more than naive dreamers. "Humanity's strength," Julian continued, his words more deliberate now, "isn't in our size or tech. It's in our will. We've fought wars longer than you've all been alive, not because we wanted to, but because we had to. We survive. We don't quit, and we fight dirty if we have to." The room hummed with tension, and Julian could feel the weight of the decision pressing on them all. He wasn't sure how they'd respond, but he knew one thing. He'd given them something to think about, something they hadn't accounted for. "Your fleets may be able to stop the invasion," Julian said, his voice steady now, "but you'll need our methods to stop it before it's too late. You need us." The Jareen delegate looked at the others, and finally, the HFY spoke. "I've heard enough," they said, their energy form rippling with growing intensity. "If humanity is willing to commit forces, then we will support them. But be warned, if you fail, it will be catastrophic." The chairperson, a massive stone-like being, raised one arm. "It is decided," the chairperson said in their deep, rumbling voice. "Humanity will lead an assault against the invaders. The council will lend its support." The weight of their decision hit Julian like a shockwave. He couldn't quite believe it. The council had just agreed to let humanity take the lead in saving an entire species, and for the first time, they had taken humanity seriously. The human fleet shot through the void of space like a storm front, a ragtag collection of ships cobbled together from decades of design and ingenuity. Unlike the sleek, polished vessels of the galactic powers, Earth's ships looked worn, their hulls scarred from countless missions. But there was an energy to them, a fire in their engines that none of the other species could match. They moved quickly, darting between asteroids, using every inch of space to their advantage. Julian Raz stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, the largest ship in the fleet, its design old but reliable. The bridge crew worked in near silence, their faces illuminated by the cold glow of the consoles. Outside, the Tyrant system loomed large, its planet burning under the assault of a fleet unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. The invaders were monstrous. Vast warships, each one bigger than Earth's largest cities, their weapons capable of reducing entire continents to rubble with a single strike. They moved in a perfect, ruthless formation, hammering the Tyrant defenses into dust. There was no mercy in their approach, only the cold logic of destruction. "They won't expect us," Julian muttered, more to himself than anyone else. The captain of the Vanguard, Commander Eli Moore, turned to him with a grim smile. "If they did, they wouldn't be so damn comfortable." "Let's make them uncomfortable," Julian replied. "All ships, prepare for engagement. We go in hot." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crew. The orders were clear. There would be no formal declaration of war, no grand strategy. Humanity was about to do what it had always done best: fight dirty. The fleet split into smaller formations, each ship accelerating to breakneck speeds, dodging debris and weaving between the chaos of the battlefield. Julian watched the view screen as the first human ships engaged the enemy, firing a barrage of missiles that streaked across the void like comets. The enemy didn't respond immediately. They were too focused on the Tyrants, too confident in their superiority. That was their mistake. Within moments, the human ships were upon them. Smaller, faster, unpredictable. They didn't fight in neat lines or predictable formations. They were everywhere. A handful of ships darted in and out of enemy lines, drawing fire away from the Tyrant defenders. Another group launched a series of deceptive decoys, drones that looked like human warships but exploded into blinding light upon contact. And then the real attack came. A squadron of human ships flew straight into the heart of the enemy formation, ignoring traditional battle tactics. They used everything they had: makeshift EMP bombs, highly concentrated energy beams, and good old-fashioned brute force. A massive Tyrant city ship, its hull pocked with craters from earlier bombardments, hung in the air like a dying leviathan. The human ships swarmed it, darting between its arms like hornets, disabling weapons, targeting critical systems. "This is madness," one of the Tyrant generals shouted over the comms, watching in horror as the humans closed in for the kill. The humans were relentless. There were no rules, no time for hesitation. They used every weapon, every scrap of tech they could lay their hands on. One of the ships dropped a payload of specially designed bombs, a form of blast that mimicked a seismic shockwave, rattling the very core of the invaders' fleet. The first enemy ship exploded in a glorious burst of fire and twisted metal. The shockwave reverberated through space, signaling to the enemy that they were no longer in control. They had underestimated humanity, and now the price was being paid. "Direct hit, Captain," one of the crew members reported. "We've got their attention now." Julian felt the shift in the air. For the first time since they had arrived, the invaders seemed uncertain. They had underestimated humanity's resolve. They had underestimated how far humans would go when pushed into a corner. Julian turned to Commander Moore. "Keep pushing them. We break them today." Moore nodded. "Aye, sir." The fight was just beginning, but humanity had already made its mark. The invaders had laughed at Earth. Now they were learning that humanity didn't back down. Not when it mattered. The tide of battle was shifting, but the enemy didn't understand why. They couldn't comprehend the sheer ferocity with which the humans fought. It wasn't about strength or advanced technology. It was something deeper, something raw. Humanity fought not because they had to, but because they couldn't stop. On the front lines, the humans were everywhere, unpredictable. One ship, barely large enough to be considered a fighter, darted through the chaos, launching erratic, widespread bursts of energy at the massive invader warships. It was a technique that seemed reckless at first, until the enemy ship suddenly found its targeting systems fried, its shields flickering in and out. "That's Lieutenant Kara at the helm," Commander Moore remarked as the human ship executed another impossible maneuver, evading a direct hit by plunging into an asteroid field. "She's a madwoman," Julian muttered, watching the display. The ship seemed to dodge and weave in ways that defied logic, drawing fire from all directions, only to vanish behind a cloud of debris, reappearing at the most unexpected moments. "Humans are good at surviving," Moore said with a grin. "And they get creative under pressure." On the surface of Tyran, human ground forces were doing the same. Where most species used highly specialized tools and sophisticated machines in battle, the humans improvised. They turned wreckage into traps. They used what they had, anything they could find. Private Ria Cheng, an engineering officer, stood among the rubble of a once beautiful Tyrant city, her face smudged with dirt and sweat. Her hands worked quickly, stripping parts from a fallen Tyrant drone. She didn't have the advanced nanomaterials the enemy had, but she didn't need them. With a few quick movements, she fashioned an explosive device using old Earth technology, setting it in the path of an incoming invader platoon. "This'll do," she muttered to herself, hitting the detonation switch just as the invaders approached. The explosion rattled the ground, throwing enemy troops into disarray. Rhea's squad of engineers and soldiers moved quickly, firing back with weapons they had scavenged from the wreckage. The enemy, once sure of their dominance, now found themselves caught in a vicious, disorienting fight. One they weren't prepared for. Nothing fancy, just effective. Rhea radioed her team. Keep them on their heels. Back on the Vanguard, Julian could see the same improvisation unfolding. Human pilots were not bound by the expected strategies that governed conventional warfare. They created their own chaos. One pilot, Lieutenant Robert Ellis, used his ship's speed to get within range of a larger invader ship, only to launch a series of kamikaze drones packed with explosives. As the ship turned to engage him, Ellis swooped down with his fighter, narrowly dodging a blast, while the drones detonated at the enemy's rear. "This is madness," the enemy captain growled through the comms. "What are they?" "They're human," Julian said, his eyes narrowing as the fleet pressed their attack. "We're nothing special, just like you said, but we know how to survive. And when it matters, we never stop fighting." The humans fought like wild animals backed into a corner, biting, scratching, and clawing for survival. They didn't follow the rules. They didn't fight with elegance or grace. They fought to win. And in the midst of all the chaos and bloodshed, the invaders started to realize something important. They were losing. They had underestimated humanity's resilience. They had thought that the humans would back down. But the truth was far more terrifying. The humans were too stubborn to quit, and that made them the most dangerous force in the galaxy. The invaders, once confident in their overwhelming power, were beginning to crack under the pressure. They had expected humanity to falter, to retreat in the face of advanced technology and superior numbers. Instead, they found themselves scrambling to keep up with Earth's unpredictable tactics. It was no longer just a battle of fleets. It had become a war of attrition, a fight of wills, and humanity was proving to have the unbreakable edge. On Tyrant's surface, the fighting had escalated to desperate levels. The remaining Tyrant civilians, those lucky enough to be hidden in the underground shelters, sent out intermittent messages of hope. The humans, despite being outnumbered and outgunned, had given them that hope. They fought with a viciousness that made the invaders question their very strategy. At the epicenter of the ground war, Rhea Cheng and her team continued to push forward, using every scrap of technology and ingenuity they could muster. Their mission had shifted from defense to offense. Terran's once thriving cities were now mere battlegrounds, their streets littered with the wreckage of invader forces and hastily constructed human traps. The human soldiers worked in teams, setting ambushes, creating barricades out of debris, and using smoke and mirrors to disorient the enemy. Rhea crouched behind a pile of rubble, peering through a cracked viewport into the distance. She could see the invaders advancing, bigger, stronger, more organized, but they were no longer as sure of themselves. The ground was pockmarked with explosions, the air heavy with the smell of burning metal and sulfur. "Command, this is Rhea. We've got them boxed in. The southern flank is ready for the final push." There was a brief silence on the comms before Julian's voice crackled through, steady and calm as ever. "Do it. We'll cover you from above." Rhea gave a sharp nod, though no one could see it. She was surrounded by her squad, all of them with the same grim resolve. They'd come a long way from being a scattered, disorganized force. Now, they were a well-oiled machine, unstoppable and relentless. The human ships above, meanwhile, continued their relentless assault. They had already secured a foothold in the skies, using their small size and unpredictable movements to take out key targets in the invader fleet. Lieutenant Kara's ship, the one that had first caught the attention of the enemy, was now at the forefront of the aerial assault. She dove into the chaos once again, her ship narrowly avoiding enemy fire as she released a payload of high-intensity EMP charges, knocking out the invaders' communication systems and disorienting their coordination. Down below, the invaders were scrambling. They hadn't anticipated the level of resistance they were facing. Their forces, while numerous, were disjointed. They hadn't accounted for human unpredictability, for their ability to adapt and thrive in the most dire of situations. Back at the command center aboard the Vanguard, Julian watched the unfolding situation with a mixture of satisfaction and anxiety. The invaders were pulling back. It was clear they had underestimated Earth's ability to fight for survival. Reporting enemy retreat from the southern sector, a voice reported from the tactical console. They're regrouping, but they're losing momentum. Julian leaned forward. Good, but we're not finished yet. Not by a long shot. Moore agreed, her eyes locked on the tactical map. We hit them hard today, but they'll be back. And next time, they'll expect us. Julian's fingers drummed on the console, his gaze fixed on the shimmering star system on the monitor. He had known this would happen. The invaders would retreat, regroup, and come back stronger. But humanity had already planted a seed of doubt in their minds. The ground cracked, and the enemy began to understand. This was no longer just a fight for survival. This was a war of attrition, a test of endurance, and humanity was built for that. The invaders had retreated, but their retreat was not one of surrender. It was a regrouping, a tactical withdrawal meant to bring reinforcements, a sign that humanity's unpredictable methods had rattled them. But Julian knew better than to celebrate. The fight was far from over. If anything, the worst was yet to come. The human fleet hovered on the edge of Tyran space, waiting. They had delivered a blow, yes, but the enemy would return, and they would return with everything they had. Julian had seen it too many times in history. The enemy doesn't admit defeat easily. They adapt. They learn. You're right to be cautious, Commander Moore said as Julian stared out of the observation window on the Vanguard. But we've pushed them back further than anyone thought we could. This fight is shifting. I just hope it's enough, Julian replied, his mind racing through scenarios. He wasn't afraid of losing. Not really. He was afraid of the cost. Every battle, every decision, meant more lives lost. But that was the nature of war. It didn't ask permission. It took. Back on Tyran, the Tyrans themselves had started to emerge from the underground shelters. Their world was scared, but not destroyed. They owed their survival to the humans, whose reckless courage had held off the enemy long enough for the remaining civilians to escape. But the Tyrans weren't the only ones watching. The rest of the Galactic Council had begun to take notice too. Many had doubted the human resolve, unsure whether they would last in the face of overwhelming odds. But now, even the most cautious delegates were reassessing their stance. I think they're ready to talk. Korka's voice came over the comms. The elder from the Triumph Collective was one of the first to reach out, now that the invaders had withdrawn for the time being. Julian raised an eyebrow. Ready to talk. After all this time, they're finally ready. Yes, Julian, Korka replied with a dry tone. We were wrong. Your species, your people, they fight in a way we've never seen. It's not just strategy or power. It's desperation. It's will. We underestimated that. The words stung, but Julian kept his voice steady. I'm glad you see it now. The galaxy needs to understand that humanity is not here to be pushed around. We fight to survive. And we don't quit. There was a long pause on the comms before Korka spoke again. We will send emissaries to the enemy to discuss terms, but you must prepare yourselves. They will likely not offer peace. This war is far from over. I know, Julian replied, but I don't need peace. I need victory. The words echoed in his mind as he looked out at the stars. The galaxy had watched, amused, as humans rose from their ashes. They had laughed at humanity's violent past, its fractured history, its failures. But now, humanity had shown them what it could do. They'd seen how deep the human resolve ran, how far people would go to protect what mattered most. And now the invaders were the ones on the back foot. They had underestimated humanity once. They wouldn't make that mistake again. The tide had shifted, but the war was far from over. And Julian knew, with a certainty that cut through the noise of doubt, that humanity would not stop until they had won. The final battle had arrived. The invaders, regrouped and reinforced, had gathered their full might, preparing for a last desperate push. They had learned to fear humanity, but they still believed their overwhelming strength would crush the smaller, weaker fleets of Earth. They were wrong. The human fleet, battered but unyielding, was ready. The ships were not the most advanced, nor were they the largest, but they had one thing the invaders did not: an unshakable determination. Julian stood at the command center of the vanguard, watching the tactical display. The situation was critical, but he was calm, steeled by everything they had been through. The fate of Tyran, and perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance. "All ships on my mark," Julian commanded, his voice low but steady. He could feel the tension in the air. The enemy was out there, lurking, waiting for the humans to make the first move. Suddenly, the comms crackled. "Enemy fleet inbound," more reported from the bridge. Multiple large ships advancing on Tyran. Julian didn't flinch. He'd known this moment was coming. "We're not waiting for them to make the first move," he said. "We engage now. Full assault." The human fleet surged forward, accelerating at full speed. The invaders had built their ships to intimidate, their size and weaponry designed to dominate. But the human ships were nimble, fast, and scattered. They darted in and out of the enemy's formation, their unpredictable tactics sowing chaos. It wasn't just about firepower anymore. Humanity had become masters of the art of war through desperation and improvisation. They used every weapon, every trick they had learned through years of conflict. They disabled the enemy's communication systems with precision EMP strikes. They lured enemy ships into traps, using decoys and misdirection. Every move was calculated, every decision a gamble, but it was working. Slowly, the invaders began to break apart. On the ground, the Tyrans, once helpless, were now fighting alongside the humans. They had learned from their rescuers, adapting quickly to the brutal style of warfare. Tyran fighters, though not as skilled as the humans, had grown stronger in these desperate days. Together, they pushed the invaders out of the city, reclaiming ground inch by bloody inch. But victory came at a cost. The human fleet, though victorious, was severely damaged. The vanguard had lost key systems, its shields flickering as the last barrage of enemy fire rocked its hull. On the ground, countless soldiers, both human and Tyran, had fallen. Ria Cheng, leading her squad, had already taken multiple hits, and she barely made it back to the extraction point as the last of the invader forces retreated. Julian's heart sank as the final reports came in. The battle was won, but the price had been steep. As the invaders turned and fled, their fleet in disarray, Julian knew that Earth's role in the galaxy had changed forever. The invaders had seen what humanity was capable of. They had come for Tyran, expecting an easy victory. But humanity had shown them that some things can't be crushed. Not by force, not by technology, not by overwhelming numbers. Humanity had fought for survival, and in doing so, had earned a place in the galactic order. As the last of the invader ships disappeared into the void, Julian allowed himself a moment of relief. They had won, but the cost was something he would carry with him forever. "Is it over?" Moore asked quietly, her eyes fixed on the monitors. Julian nodded slowly, his gaze distant. For now, it had been a war of survival, but humanity had survived. And though they had paid a heavy price, they had proven one thing above all else: humanity would not be the one to fall. Not today. Not ever.